Well, we're going to go back to the notebook. I was going to do a video, this one, but Bill asked me to cover some of the politics of Israel rather than the history. I think history and politics is like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Put them together, it makes a whole. It fits together, yeah, and you get different perspectives when you look at the politics. So we're going to just go through briefly. It's on page 53 in the notebook. See that? Yeah, we moved. Well, I skipped the secular history and the archaeologies at the end. I think Larry's going to do that next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I guess, on the 7th. We don't have class for the next 2, and then he's going to do 4 weeks of our archaeology and up to date, what's going on today. Okay, so let's go to page 53. The first thing we'll look at is this is a famous quote from Mark Twain. Mark Twain visited Palestine, okay, in 1867 is when he went there. And look what he wrote in a book called Innocents Abroad, one of his books, and he wrote this statement. Description of Palestine: a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but it's given over to weeds. What?
Only to weeds.
I gotta put my glasses on. There you go. I hate wearing these now.
Mournful expanse.
Thank you. Go ahead. Keep reading. Reading.
A desolation. We never saw a human being on the whole route. Hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of a worthless soil, had almost deserted the country.
Now, some people have challenged that quote, but it's him right there. He went there and wrote it in a book.
That was his experience anyway,
Yeah. So when Israel came back, they began to make it blossom like a rose, like Scripture talks about. If you've been there, a lot of you have been there, and you see the stuff that's going and what they're leading the world in a lot of fields. Israel has done things with technology and weapons and growing, finding ways to grow things faster and better, irrigation. Okay. So there's this quote is used of Palestine like before the coming of the Jews back home. All right. So it wasn't a pleasant place. So when you complain that what Israel did, look what they did. They brought it into the modern Syria. They made the economy grow. They fixed up places. They made beautiful gardens and stuff. And all that's done since they've been there. All right. So then this word here, Havel. Ha-Aviel. Okay, that means lovers of Zion, that they are around the world. There were lots of groups. So we got a long gap in history from Hadrian, who kicked the Jews out, okay, until we get back in the 1800s, 1890s, when Jews come back. What's going on in those, couple thousand years? And all you can get is that Jews lived around the world. Most of them went to Europe, so the Jews became Europe. Most of them went to Russia, so they were living in Europe. Reading through this, I had this thing, the Doctrine of Hamas, and they talk about that they believe Israel did not inhabit the land. They were from Europe, that the Jews were from Europe and not from Palestine. That's a claim they make, so they can say about anything they want. But in reality, there were a lot of Jews living in Europe. The French had a program to send, it was a colonization program to send Jews to North and South America. They would pay their way, just like we do now. Anybody know in American history what we did the same thing? We bought a land for people and shipped them there.
American Indians.
No, they kind of stayed where they were. They didn't ship them anywhere that I know of. Oh, they kept them in the same country, though.
Yes, sir.
No, Liberia, during Monroe's presidency.
Did we actually send them? I know
Yes.
we talked about it before.
Yeah, we were free Jews, free slaves. They were welcome to go voluntarily.
Was Haile Selassie? Was that Selassie?
No, he's on the other side, Ethiopia.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jamaica. He's big in Jamaica. Yeah. Let's see. I was talking about, and then Liberia. We had the thing called the American Colonization Society, that bought land in Africa, and sent slaves over there to return home. They sent them home. Today, you did that, you'd be a racist or something like that. But they did it as a good gesture to say, you want to go home, we'll pay your way. And then,
It's sort of like saying, sending us, you want to go home, and no, they'd send us to Nova Scotia or something. I mean, Liberia wasn't where all those slaves were home.
yeah.
Anyway, it's
Well,
like
it was
saying,
more recent though. See, it was more recent.
Pardon?
It was around 1820, 1830 that this was organized, and they bought it in Liberia. You know what the capital of Liberia is?
Monrovia.
Yeah, it's the only capital named after a U.S. president. So it was not something they had to do, it was something they wanted to do. And then that got to be a problem. How do you send people home now? That's a problem with the dreamers, that how you send them back to home. They were 2 or 3 when they left. They have no idea what that is. Yeah. So
why
it's,
did the Jews, in the first place, why did they go to in Russia in those numbers?
they had to go somewhere. And they went other places. They went to North and South America. Some had colonies in Africa.
Why did they leave the land?
They were forced. In 1930, the year 130 AD, Hadrian expelled the Jews from Israel. They had to leave. Now there were a few pockets that stayed behind, but most left, and they had to go somewhere. And Europe was an inviting place to go.
So it was Hadrian that drove them out.
And that, the Babylonians did it too. They drove them more toward the eastern side of the world.
Yeah.
But with Hadrian, they had no place they had to go. Yeah, a lot of them went to North African countries. There were a lot of Jews in those countries. So when they opened up Israel to a new state, a lot of those Jews that came to Israel, and a lot of them left Russia. And plus, there was a movement called Judenross in German. Jews get out. That was the phrase they had in Europe. And so French tried to send them to the North and South America. Yeah, the Russians tried to get rid of them. So, yeah, that was a thing where they kind of liked the Jewish homeland because they would get rid of the Jews. Now, does anybody have an idea why? What is peculiar about Jews that brought on a lot of this persecution?
I was about to ask that. So why did Hadrian feel like he needed to drive?
Well, they rebelled against him. That was the rebellion of Bar Kokhba was the one that rebelled. They thought he was the Messiah, and so it ticked off Hadrian. That's when he scraped it dry, built a statue of Jupiter there, and just changed the name from Judea to Syria, Palestine. He didn't want anything to Jews. Jews were forbidden to look at Jerusalem, and so they had to go somewhere. So a lot of them ended up in Europe because it was a economic and nicer place to live. So they moved. And I'm not sure exactly why Russia was so prominent, but a lot of the Jews that came back to Israel were Russian Jews. But the question I asked was, what's the motivative? And it was a persecution for sure, but
Was it because they were so inclusive?
yeah, that's the term I was looking for.
So isolated from everyone else, and they would
Yeah.
isolate themselves.
Yeah, the parochial is kind of the big word for that. Yeah, they all lived together. Everywhere they went, they lived in
They
communities.
didn't intermarry. And
Yeah. Now you think about that. For 2,000 years, they were living in other countries. And I noticed a while ago that a lot of people that came to the United States were Irish Americans. I'm half Irish, half German. Came to America from a lot of countries, Poland, Spain. And when they came, they were German Americans, they were Irish Americans. But when the Jews came, they were American Jews.
Was there a morality about them that bothered others because they kind of felt like they were better than others? Or?
Well, you would get that opinion, people that live alone and don't want to have other people join them and not intermarry. Yeah, they tend to be that way. They look like they're elitist. Yeah. So that was a problem. So everywhere they went, they looked like, you're special. We're God's children. That was a big thing to say, Yeah, that we're God's chosen
killed
people.
Jesus, that some people said, they killed Jesus.
Yeah, that was a big thing, that they were responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus. That was big in Europe, where they tried to blame the Jews for that. Okay, so what happens then is the beginning of the Zionist movement then. That's where the things changed. For all those years, they were just living in places and having their services, synagogues. They built communities. And they got persecuted everywhere there got to be a lot of Jews. Some of the Jews would live inside. And a big lesson you learn from these notes is that the Jews were not for assimilation. That was a big issue everywhere they went. Europe, they said, we tried to assimilate the Jews into our culture. They wouldn't do it. Now they're having trouble with Muslims coming to France and Germany. They don't want to assimilate. They want to stay among their own people.
Or in Detroit and Ann Arbor, they didn't want to assimilate, they want to take over.
Yeah, and they elected Muslims to Congress because of they have minarets now in like Hamtramck and places like that. They have minarets that call to prayer, and because of the population is so much Islam, they can't get them out by law because they won't vote for those laws. So so it's pretty good when you have a thing like that. I heard once read that Mormons wanted to go someplace and take over a state, and it was Vermont. Yeah, you picked a small state, small state, small population, where you could make a difference. It never panned out, but that was the idea that we're going to go.
That's why they left and went to Utah, because Utah wasn't Utah. The Mormons left because of persecution, and they went to a place where there was no persecution because there was no state. And the bad news is that the population got big enough and Utah became a state, but they were a completely separate division.
Well, they had to give up polygamy to become a state. Congress required that they give up polygamy, so they just made it spiritual rather than physical. Okay, we move on to this. All right, this is the Alfred Dreyfus trial. It's become a icon in jurisprudence. It's used all the time for anti-Semitism. But he was a captain in the French army, okay? And a guy found in a wastebasket near him a note to the Germans. And so they accused him of treason. And the trial was a big trial. There were people on both sides, claiming things, but he was convicted on very thin evidence because he was Jewish. He was Jewish. And so he was convicted and sentenced to 5 years on Devil's Island. Now, if you know anything about Devil's Island, who's the famous escapee from there? Do you remember? Papillon?
Yeah.
The butterfly? Yeah. Yeah, that's a small island, about 7 acres. And it's about 7 miles off the coast of French Guiana. And he was sent there for 5 years and served his term. Okay. Then he was retried. He claimed he was innocent. There was pressure on the public to retry him. He came back and was convicted for 10 years, sentenced to 10 more years. But the next day, the president of France pardoned him. Public pressure. So the people were arguing that you're persecuting Jewish and you're doing all this stuff. It was a real bad trial, almost like Sacco and Vanzetti, if you know anything about that trial in America. All right. So what happens then? All right. Being a German spy, the situation caused the reporter who witnessed the trial to realize that the Jews needed a homeland. And there's some historical dispute about how much that influenced Theodor Herzl. He's the hero of the story. That he was he was a journalist copying and writing about the story, and he saw the way this Jew was treated. And so he started making the statements that Jews are not going to be safe until they have their homeland. And that began the thing for Jews to return. It took a while, and this guy went to all kinds of places to get this done. And I have some other notes about that. Okay, he became the father of Zionism. Now, in this document here from Hamas, they say pretty plainly that they're not against the Jews, they're against the Zionists. But I didn't see that on October 7th. They were killing Jews, just Jews. But that's kind of their statement that they publicize, that we're not really opposed to Jews. That's a religion that came out of the Bible, and they came out of the Bible. And Muslims look at Adam as part of Abraham part of their culture.
But then they wouldn't persecute them here, which they're trying to do, right? If you're only against them being in Palestine, why do you care if they're in the United States?
Because the United States supports Palestine, supports Israel.
Yeah, in Islam, we're the big Satan, and Israel's the little Satan. That's how they describe that. So they organized 20 Jewish settlements in those years. So as the talk came along, they began to organize settlements. All right, but they're a long way from getting back to Israel. All right, there's the trial and then ruled by the Turkish Sultan, all right? I believe homeland should be in Palestine, so that was the big issue. They had, I think it was 49, that there was a suggestion, the Germans, that they make a settlement in Kenya. It was actually called the Uganda Project, because Kenya and Uganda are like brothers and sisters. They're around Lake Victoria. They're called the Lake States. They're around the big Lake Victoria. And so they were going to send them to Kenya. We got land there. The British, well, that was a British colony. The British people didn't care. So let's send the Jews there. Where did Hitler want to send the Jews for a while? And that fell through. Hitler had a plan to send the Jews somewhere out of Europe rather than kill them. Madagascar plan. That's history, that they wanted to say, we got find a place we can send them, and we'll ship them all there, and it'll end the problem. All right. So what you see in Herzl's writings all the time is the Jewish question: what to do with the Jews? What do you do with these people that are clannish, that are separate? All right. What do you do with them? They're hated. We don't know what to do with them. You can't kill them. All right. We had that same problem with Indians in this country. I mentioned Native Americans. Jefferson had three choices with the Native Americans. He could send them west, he could assimilate them, or he could kill them. And so what do you do with it? And the solution was send them west of the Mississippi. So that was the idea, that we can't deal with them here. They don't want to assimilate. They were offered that idea. Why do you want to assimilate? They had a program, the country had a program to go around rounding up Indian children and bringing them to schools that were Western schools to try to educate them in the Western ways. But the Indians just said, well, no, we want our own culture. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. So the only choice left was move them. So I think that's the same thing going on here. What do we do with the Jews? Well, move them. Where? I don't know. There's a big island called Madagascar. Nobody cares about something there. Just like what Jefferson did or Monroe did with the ex-slaves. They were freed slaves, sent them back to Africa. Okay, and I remember that as a kid talking about that. People were talking about we need to send Black Americans back to Africa, and people would say, "Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, they don't know anything about Africa. Yeah, it's just a crazy idea to do that." Plus, very racist, because they weren't doing it. Well, see, some of the people doing that were favorable. They wanted to do something positive for ex-slaves. We enslaved them. We got to send them back to their homelands, give them a country, let them govern themselves. And Liberia is one of the worst countries in the world. Yeah, it's not very well organized there, or very, very successful.
The people who went didn't know how to govern.
Yeah.
They had been slaves. They had lived their lives being cared for by other people. So the very end of the Lawrence of Arabia movie, I think, covers a lot of what happened all around the world, because the people didn't want to take the jobs. The Arabs that were going to take over Jerusalem or wherever it was at the end of Lawrence of Arabia, nobody wanted to pick up the garbage. Nobody wanted to run the plumbing system. They all wanted to be kings. And they had this big fight, and Lawrence finally says, "I'm out of here, I can't stand it." So, and I think that happened in a lot of places. They were not prepared to lead. They had not been trained, educated for any of those kind of jobs. So things didn't get done.
Well, that was a very historical comment. It was the idea that let's see, that when I have a question on one of my tests that says, what was the big fault of colonialism? And the answer is, it didn't prepare the people to take over. It's like parents that prepare their kids. My kids are all successful. My daughter's a millionaire. She just sold her company for $10 million. And my other daughter just got her PhD, and she's got job offers in several places. And my son travels the world doing technical stuff. But I forced them to work, forced them to get an education. My son was got a couple of credits away from graduating from college, and he said, "Dad, I don't want." I said, "Tell you what, I'll do an independent study." So I contacted the college as a professor. "I'm going to give you an independent study, and you're going to get your last credits and graduate." Yeah, Now he's glad he did, but see that was the idea. We don't prepare our kids for the real world, and that's happening more and more now. That they leave home because they can't wait to get out, and then they have no way to really know how to run the world. So that was colonies. They just pulled out when it became unpopular to have colonies, and left the people without much experience in governance. All right, so then on Herzl, it says he's going to call the first Zionist conference, 1897. So for the first time that the Zionists got together and said, we're going to meet and talk about what to do, okay? And the conference meeting was at Casino in Basel, Switzerland, okay? And there were, 208 participants?
200%.
There you go. I knew it was in there somewhere. Who sought to establish a Zionist organization, later called the World Zionist Organization, and to publish their goals. And I have a statement from that, what they did. There were 4 things that they did, they wanted, and they put in their founding documents, to achieve the expedient promotion of the settlement of Jewish agriculturalists, artisans, and businessmen in Palestine. So we're going to send over people that can build businesses and are intelligent, educated.
See, a statement like that leads to some of the confusion, I think, because establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine. But that makes people think that there was...
Yeah. Well, see, that was what it was called under the Ottomans. That was the region of Palestine. It wasn't a country, it was a region. Yeah. And, like you said, you use the word Southern. I'm a Southern, but what state are you from? See, you can say, well, I'm just from the South.
But actually, people don't make that distinction.
Well, I know because it's been called Palestine. And the Palestinians were smart enough to call it that. Yeah, they begin to say, we're Palestine. But in a lot of the articles I read, it said that they called them as Palestinian Arabs. They weren't Palestinians, they were Palestinian Arabs, meaning Arabs living in that region of the world. So they didn't have a homeland or an identity. Okay. In the
For a long number of years, there were Turks. I remember how the Ottoman Turks, I remember what year it was, but everybody over there was a Turk. You were a Jew or a Turk. And the Arab Turks, but then when the British came in and set up the Palestinian region, is that then that's when Palestine became even more used. But there's not a country, Palestine, and nor is there an ethnic group, Palestinians.
Yeah, they're simply Arabs. Because the Ottoman Empire began in Turkey. Osman I in 1299, I think, organized it and grew and grew and grew and grew and grew and finally took over all the Middle East. Okay, and then when the settlement after World War I with the British, they gave the Turks Turkey. You can have this. They gave the Egyptians Egypt. You can be a country. So they just built all these countries from what was left of the Ottoman Empire, because they had to give up all that land when they lost the war. Okay, second one was the organization and bringing together of all Jews through local and general events according to the laws of various countries. So we're going to have a lot of Jewish events. They even had a Jewish Olympics. And it was just for Israel. Third thing is the strengthening of Jewish feeling and national consciousness. So they had to invent a national consciousness that we're Israel, we're Jews. Yeah. They were forced to speak Hebrew in the schools. All the schools teach Hebrew. You speak in Hebrew. Yeah, they wanted to establish an identity. That's going to be an important thing if I get to it. So they had to develop that, and Theodor Herzl would meet with the Chancellor of Germany, Wilhelm II. He would go to Turkey and talk to the Ottoman king and try to get recognition that here I am meeting with these people, that I have legitimacy. I'm not just some random idiot trying to do something, that I am really legitimate. And with the conference kind of gave them a place to say, yeah, we have a legitimate movement. Okay.
Which then is the blueprint for the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, is you set up an organization that you legitimize yourself, however illegitimate you are, you become that. And so that was the same type of national identity which happened in the 60s. Yeah. So it's very interesting.
You just made me think of NAMBLA. You know what NAMBLA is? Okay, you don't want to know. All right, yeah, they have an organization. All right, preparatory steps for obtaining, this is the fourth one, the government approval which is necessary to achievement of the Zionist purpose. According to Max Nordau, we came up with the phrase "home secured by law," and that kind of irritated the Palestinians. We want a legal justification that we own this land. It's got to be legal. We're not just going to move there and live. We're going to be legally recognized by the world. That was part of their program. Okay, let's go over to the, I guess, next page. We'll try to make some progress here. Okay. And then the Basel Declaration, this is the final statement when they finish the conference. Zionism seeks to establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine secured under public law. Okay. It also included plans to make the goal reality. So they began to say, how can we do that? Buy land, send educated people there, okay, begin to live there. Okay, so that we can establish it. Okay, now the first Jewish settlements then. See, that's after getting kicked out of Judea, they're now finally looking to have settlements. The Jewish National Fund, so that rich Jews would give money to the fund and people could go there and buy land. One of the things Herzl did, he says he went to the Abdul Hamid, I think was the king of the Ottoman Empire. And he went to him and says, guess what? We'll trade our money and help you with your goodwill if you'll give us an area in Palestine. He actually tried to make a deal with the Ottoman Empire and says, tell you what, you got a bad rep. They had just killed a bunch of Armenian Christians. People hate you. You think you're murderers and evil and stuff like that. You have big debts around the world. We Jews will take care of that debt and promote your positive image if you'll give us some land in Palestine. He turned it down. So they couldn't get a land from Ottomans, but they could move there and buy land like anybody else could. Yeah, they were free to live there, just not to own land there. Okay, let's see. The purpose of the fund was to purchase land in Palestine where Jews could live and work. That should be 3 years later, the fund bought this area, Kartar Hidim, a small village in Galilee. The land was settled by Polish Jews, so they bought land, and Jews would go from Poland and start a community. So what is that called, foot in the door? You got to get your foot in the door somehow. To be able to build something, you need to get your foot in the door. The first Hebrew language high school was founded in 1906 in Jaffa. So now they got where Jews can go to school and learn Hebrew. Now this guy is one of the guys that I really got fascinated with when I began to study this issue. He went and compiled a dictionary. He says, if we're going to be a Jewish state, we need a language. And Hebrew had not been spoken, except in religious kind of things. And he was going to rebuild up the Jewish language. This book does that. If anybody wants to borrow this is the story of what he did. I had to read this in college where he had to invent words, because for car, airplane, mall, he had to invent these words. And believe it or not, this was fascinating, is that he had opposition from Orthodox Jews of creating a new modern Hebrew language. Any idea why? Let's see how you guys think. Why would he do that?
Well, he might have thought that was sort of sullying the religious purpose of the language.
Yeah, great. You're an excellent student, Myrna.
Oh.
Exactly it. They thought that the old Hebrew was just a holy language. It shouldn't be used for casual, like a mall or a car or lunch. Yeah. So a lot of Jews opposed it. But most of them then kind of said, that's what we want. We want an identity. We need our own language. Because language is a big factor in identity. But he compiled a 6-volume dictionary. It's of all the Hebrew words. He spent his whole life doing that, okay? Let's see. One of the things that he did is the use of Hebrew, their language, not for everyday conversation, to discuss mundane and non-holy things. We don't want Hebrew to do that. But he prevailed, okay? And the city of Tel Aviv then was founded, which is Hill of Spring, 1909, on the Mediterranean Sea. The town was to be, Garrett is again, all Jewish town. So I think the Jewish have some responsibility for saying we don't want anybody else. We want to live our way to do it. Now, do people have that right to live in a certain area, like Martha's Vineyard, keep everybody else out? Hilton Head Island is that way. It's really something. They don't. You can't build a house in Hilton Head. You got to buy one that's already there. They've got all kinds of rules like that. When I was there, I was staying for a weekend. I got a newspaper article, and it said, you know why they don't have lights on the beach? If you go on the beach in Hilton Head, it's pitch dark. You can't see a thing. And I'm thinking, well, because of the environment, it would be because of the turtles. It wasn't. The article said the reason we do that is so you can see the stars. And if you go on the beach at Hilton Head, you look up, you can see the stars. Because every place else they're diffused by the lights. You can't see them very well. But in Hilton Head, you can see it. They're amazing to see it from a place where there's no other lights around except the stars. So I see clannishness is common, I think. People want to be their own, be on their own, have their own stuff, own language. Is there any cure for that? See, we have the thing of diversity except for whites now. Yeah, the way it's going on in Boston. All right.
The diversity right now isn't diversity with people mixing. It's everybody's separate from everybody else.
Yeah.
We need equal, safe places because
Yeah,
you're
well,
not safe to be
Yeah,
around.
colleges are having all black dorms and clubs
Yeah,
and stuff.
so
We're
instead
returning to
of-
segregation.
Yeah,
Well, in some ways, mixing becomes the same. I think there's a room for all girls colleges and the military colleges and things like that. I think there's room for specialized organizations. Everything doesn't have to be diverse. Doesn't I had a problem. I started the intramural program at Valencia. They got rid of their intercollegiate athletics because they were bringing people from all over the country and say, well, we're not dealing with our own students. We're giving money to all these people from everywhere coming to play basketball and softball and stuff. So they cut the program, and they asked me if I would start the intramural program. And so I did it. I did all kinds of stuff and scheduled and did sports and all that kind of stuff. I got in the Kissimmee League. I started a basketball league and stuff. And then one day I was looking at the rosters. I was getting organized for the semester. And I realized that the basketball team was all black, 90%. The soccer team was all Hispanic, almost 90%. And the softball team was all white. You know, overwhelmingly so. And I said, golly, am I in trouble here? I've got a segregated sports program.
But
but
not by,
No, it's called
Not by design.
It's called de facto segregation when it happens just by natural.
by skill.
It was by interest more than skill, but
Well,
yeah.
but Ron, it is by skill, because it's in a city where you maybe have a high black population in an enclave, because they are choosing it, or it's chosen for them, whichever you want to argue. There's basketball courts, there's not baseball diamonds, there's not soccer fields.
Unless you go to
There's
Caribbean, there's
So
a
they
soccer
have-
field or we open field, there's
They-
a soccer
they-
field.
They have access to basketball. The South American Hispanic population has access to soccer. I was talking to somebody who was from Africa, and he said in Africa, the first thing a little child is given, predominantly boys, but anybody else, is a ball, a soccer ball. And you've got nothing else to play with, you're outside kicking your ball around. And some grown-up walks by and kicks it back to you, and you kind of kick it back and forth a little while, and then the grown-up keeps on going. So the culture
Well,
that those people come from includes that. What do we do with little white suburban boys? Is we put them in Little League.
And we
You
give
know,
them
we
that
teach them.
yeah, it's changing because a lot of pro teams are going to Africa to look for athletes because if you see the Maasai, they're all over 6'8".
You tried to teach football, and it didn't go well for you.
Yeah, I tried to, in Kenya, I brought a football. And I said, here's what we do. And the amazing thing about it was, if I would throw them the ball, they would catch it. Everything they'd catch it. But then they turn around and throw it and go about 3 feet. They could not throw a football. They'd never thrown how to throw a football. I had to try to teach them how to.
Because they don't use their hands.
Yeah. And it was really amazing. They could catch like anything, but they couldn't throw. And so it was fun trying to teach them that, right? We went out during breaks and played football, or tried to. Okay.
You played football.
Yeah.
They
Well,
didn't play football, you played football.
yeah. Well, they don't call it football anyway. Like soccer is not football.
Soccer's football.
All right. So at the beginning of World War I then comes along, and the liberation of Palestine. That's going to be what happens after World War I. At the beginning of the war, British attacked Ottoman Empire, which controlled Palestine. So there you go. There's a big point in this progression. Many Jews decided to fight with the British. Okay, even though they're living in Ottoman territory, they decided to fight with the British. That's where Lawrence Arabia came in. He fought the Ottomans, trying to liberate the Arabs from the Ottomans. All right, and in recognition of Jewish help during the war, the British Foreign Secretary, Balfour, sent a letter. This is a big thing, the Balfour Declaration, 1917, to Lord Rothschild, the leader of the British Jews, promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine if the Turks were defeated. So that was a big promise. Get the Jews on his side. If we defeat the Ottomans, you can have your homeland. But he did it in such vague language, it didn't mean you're going to kick the Arabs out. It meant you're going to have a homeland separate. You know, like the two countries idea. In December 1919, British Field Marshal Allenby entered the city of Jerusalem. He promised to respect the rights of all citizens, which at the time consisted of 50,000 Jews and 500,000 Arabs. Look at the numbers. That's 10 times, you know, the Arab population. And he said, we're going to let Jerusalem be a city for everybody. Do you know there are Arabs in the Jewish Knesset? About a quarter, yeah. There's Jews that live there. Arabs live there perfectly. Okay, they don't want to go to someplace else. All right. And the Jews purchased a home owned by the British soldier on the side of Mount Scopus. The site was to become the future Hebrew University. So there they bought land. They're going to build a university. See, that's the idea. They brought education. They brought farming. They brought all kinds of things when they came. That was part of the plan. We're going to, you know, take over by education, by worthiness, by merit rather than by ethnicity. Jewish leaders around the world recruited Jews to return. So always the Jewish leaders in all these places, the Jews are gone. You got to go back. You got to go back. You got to go back. I mean, a lot of young people picked up the idea. I'm Jewish, and then I need to be Jewish. Okay, that book I gave you was a girl that became, I'm Jewish. I want to be Jewish. Yeah. Noah Kimsky, a book that I gave. You gave me this one back. Too big?
I said I was going to read it and bring it back to you.
You read this already?
No. But that's
My words fell on deaf
That's
ears.
my excuse, and it only has to work now. It doesn't have to work tomorrow.
Okay, the Paris Peace Conference that settled the World War I. Okay, it was at Versailles. Okay, remember the Treaty of Versailles? The Americans didn't sign, and we didn't join the League of Nations. But so they came out to the French and British that leaders of the League of Nations had to deal with it. So we weren't involved in because we didn't get involved in the Treaty of Versailles. Have anybody seen pictures of Versailles? Incredible place. It was built by Louis XIV, and it cost so much money he tore up the receipts. He spent just countless money. It's about 14 miles outside of Paris, okay? And the conference agreed to give Great Britain a mandate to facilitate the establishment of a Jewish state. So there it is. They're getting what? What did I talk about earlier? What did they want as part of their program? Legitimacy, a legal state, not just an area, but a legal state. See, that's what the Palestinians did. They had an area, but it wasn't a legal state. Yes. And the Jews wanted a legal state. Okay. And that's what they're going to get offered, and the Palestinians are going to reject it. Okay, after 4 years of military rule, they did this. They settled a high commissioner. I see I have notes on that somewhere. Oh, there were 14 of them in 20 years from, let's see where I have that whole, I got a list of them, of the commissioners. Yeah, they established in 1925, and they remained in power till 1948. So they were in power for 40 years. They ran Palestine, a Jewish commissioner. The first guy was a strong Zionist, all right, that took over, and so they ran it with British control, but the guy was a high commissioner and did the area. No problems. They were running Jews and Arabs together, all right, living there.
And that's one of the things that now that Israel was talking about, I don't know if it's all of Israel or just Netanyahu, is that when they they finish with Gaza, whatever finish with Gaza means, that it's gonna go back under Jewish rule, which it was before until 2004, 2014,
Something like that, yeah.
2014. Is that the Israelis, which the Knesset ruled all of Gaza until 2014. In 2014, that was when it would be land for swap, where they gave Egypt back the Sinai Desert, and then they set Gaza up as an Arab or Palestinian community under their rule. I think it was in 2004, 2014. They said, it's your rule. And they left. The Israelis left.
It's a land for peace deal.
Yeah.
Land for peace deal, yeah. And
Excuse me.
the people elected Hamas as the ruling party and have never had a second election.
Okay. All right, so let's, I don't, we're running out of time.
So if you look at, that's what was doing there with the English in charge, they're going into the same thing, is that now they're trying to say this is what we'll do in Gaza.
Just like if you give us some land, we won't cause you any trouble, so you give them some land. Well, we want more land than that. We're gonna continue causing trouble until we get more land.
That's the American way.
Well, just from the river to the sea. They can have the
That's
rest.
all.
You missed my joke. You stepped on my joke. That's the American way. You give us land, we want more land. That's the American way.
All right, look, there you can see the next paragraph, the Jewish settlement and the kibbutz. They started kibbutzes, which were farms. People lived there and they had children in common and things like that. And they produced a lot of stuff.
A whole community, more than just a farm.
Well,
It's a town
But it's
that had its own
isolated from
schools.
the rest.
but the purpose was to be a farm, agriculture, animals, yeah, that was the,
A town with farms and schools.
Or fishing, like that one with the Jesus boat, right? That was more of a fishing boat.
all right. And the High Commissioner halted Jewish immigration for several months due to placate the Arabs. So the High Commissioner, the Arabs are getting upset, you're a Jew. So he began to say, well, we'll limit the Jews coming back to try to placate the Arabs that were complaining.
That didn't work either.
Yep. Winston Churchill was the colonial secretary responsible for the mandate. The Jews had a mandate, the British had a mandate to set up a place for Israel without taking away from a place for the Arabs. All right. He told Arab leaders they must accept the presence of Jews in the midst of reality. It's a reality. You've got to accept the presence of Jews. And this is the beginning of the rub that's going to break out in all these killings and stuff, that you have to accept Jews in your land. And that was something that was just abhorrent to them. A beneficial one, right? That the Jews will bring so much good to your country. You should take them and accept them, and you guys can live peacefully side by side. That was the dream all along. It never became a reality. The Arab leaders continued violent revolts against the British, even killing moderate Arabs. I see that with things like Black Lives Matter and groups like that. They kill the moderates. It's amazing that happens. That you're not strong enough, you're not black enough, you're not this enough. So we're going to get you, and they agree with you, yet they're not strong enough. So that's a big thing in culture and psychology, is to deal with the moderates, okay, that come along. All right, Arabs who wanted to live peacefully with the Jews. So a lot of Arabs wanted to live with the Jews. They didn't see any problem that they could both have two religions. We do that in this country, right? Don't we have Protestants and Catholics? They used to kill each other. I mean, Catholics and Protestants, you kill each other by the thousands. Now we're living in peace, and there's a Catholic church right down the road, and it doesn't seem to be a problem, right? Presbyterian church, an Anglican church in Celebration. Okay. All right, the Hebrew University opens in 1925. Thousands came from all over Palestine and around the world to go to Hebrew University. I mean, if I had known it then and been alive in 1925, that's the year my dad was born, I might have gone. I think, what could be greater than that? I'm jealous of Larry that he got to take a class at Hebrew University. Lord Balfour was in attendance, so he's the guy that gave that declaration. There was much opposition from the Arab population, led by Mufti of Jerusalem. He's like a teacher of the Bible, okay, the Quran. Yeah, he's like a teacher, a religious teacher. He's given the right to be the guy that's in charge of the doctrine. Jews, Arabs, and Christians were welcome to enroll. So right from the beginning, Jews welcomed Christians and Arabs to take classes at the Hebrew University. During the subsequent years, and that's where we're heading toward 1948, the Jews made great progress in developing their presence in Palestine. So it's growing. They're doing what they had planned to do at Basel to get a foothold in there and bring people there and develop settlements. Okay. In addition to the Hebrew University, they created other institutions like the Jewish Agency for Palestine, which oversaw most Jewish activity and good relations with the British, so they sought to be peaceful. The Jews made strides in agriculture and science. Some of the great things that we have were done by Jews. All right? And they organized the Maccabah, whatever that is, was the Jewish Olympics. It was one of the largest athletic events in the world. You know, I guess next to the Olympics. All right, the regular Olympics. All right. Now Hitler comes along. So that's the next stage in the Jewish politics is Hitler. Came to power in 1933. Yeah, people are real confused about Hitler came to power, right? The Nazi Party was growing and became a bigger part of the parliament in Germany. Van Hindenburg got elected president, and he appointed Hitler chancellor because the pressure from the Nazi Party was bigger, the biggest one. So he appointed Hitler chancellor, and then when Van Hindenburg died, a couple years later, Hitler said, "I'm in charge," and nobody stopped him. So he just took over because the country was wanting what he wanted. Bring Germany back, get revenge for Versailles, all the things. And so it just happened. He just said, "I'm okay." People have tried that in this country occasionally. I'm in charge. And our Constitution prevented it from doing that. So we still have a Constitution. The Nazi Party seized control. Influx of German Jews came to Palestine, obviously for obvious reasons, since he was anti-Semitic. All right. The increased opposition, the British re-examined the mandate to review the situation. So now we've got a problem here that the British had to deal with. That book I talked about last week, Exodus, was the idea of Jews trying to return, and they were stopped so that the Arabs didn't side with the Nazis. That would have been a nightmare if all the Arab nations sided with the Nazis. Okay. The Peel Commission came up with a plan. So there's a big thing now, that he was given a job to decide what can we do with the situation in Israel. Okay. David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, saw opportunity to gain a Jewish state. So here's a commission that's going to make a report to the UN how we're going to deal with Jews and Arabs in Palestine, even if it excluded land in Jerusalem. So he was really willing to give up a part of Jerusalem to get a state. And what are we talking about? A legal state, something recognized by the world. Okay, and accept the proposal. The Arabs rejected the plan altogether. They did not want any national rights for Jews. So
Was that United Nations then, or still?
yeah, there was the Peel Commission was by the UN got them. The British did.
World War II, so would it be League of
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm getting UN mixed up with League of Nations. They're so similar. It was the League of Nations.
I'm just trying to get
No, you're
my
right.
brain on the right decade.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because they stopped the League of Nations at World War II and founded the UN instead. All right. So Ben-Gurion was a great Zionist. He saw the line, hey, we can get a state, we can get what we want. We can get recognized as a legitimate country. Okay, so that's what, but the Arabs rejected it. Jewish presence continued to grow in spite of Arab opposition. The Jews' leadership split into two groups, one who wanted a peace response to Arab resistance and one who favored reprisals. So again, we have that going on in our country where some people want to do this, some people want to do this. Yeah. Some people want to close the borders, some people want to open the borders. Yeah, so,
And with that, that is where Larry is going to pick up with 1940, 1948.
yeah, we're almost
Next
there.
line.
The next line, right?
United Nations, that's Larry. Larry owns
From
United
there
Nations.
back.
Well, see, the British got out of there. They said, we're done. Well, they pulled out the day that Israel became a nation. When they became a declared nation, the British said, okay, we're gone. Turned over the problem to the United Nations. You can see why they would do that. And the United Nations tried to do the same thing, a two-state solution, and then in 48 goes on from there, and the day after they were attacked by 5 Arab nations, Israel was, and we were in war, the Arab-Islamic war, or Arab-Israeli war. Okay. All right, any questions?
That's
Close.
where Larry's supposed to pick up, 1948.
All right. And with the Jewish Declaration, and another thing you probably should be aware of, that the Jewish leaders, the Zionists, wanted a secular Israel, not a religious one.
Well, they pretty much have that.
Yeah. I mean, they coincide, but remember, they wanted any religions to come and become Israelis. You could become an Israeli. You couldn't become a Jew, but you could become an Israeli. You could become, just like anybody can become an American citizen eventually.
But most of the Jews are not really practicing Jews.
Well, a lot of them not. You know, they want a secular country, not a religious country.